idea that we put more authority in the hands of the local casework supervisors and the regional administrators. The regional administrators in the Department of Community Services really have enormous budgets, and they are often the ones that are making these decisions. But just by way of some numbers, since we are in the estimates, last year we spent about $35 million, which is about 10% of the actual amount that went out to clients on special needs. So there is some discretion, and I think by definition special needs pertains to exactly what the member is talking about. But it was more than that, because in addition to that, we spent about $17 million in employment support services, which is tailored to the individual client and trying to give them some sort of plan in order to get an education and get back in the workforce or go directly into the workforce. So between the two, that's $52 million, and that is, again, tailored really to the client's particular circumstances.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. The reason I raised that was just that the fact that there appears sometimes to be an innate fear on some of these people for fear of crossing the line or going out on a limb and making a decision, and would feel more safe hidden within the bureaucratic realm of policy. That's why I bring that forward. Mr. Minister, I would like to now turn over my time to the Honourable Member from Digby Annapolis, and thank you very much.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Last fall, in a power outage in November in the Digby area, and over Christmas time, we had to set up our schoolhouse down there for a makeshift shelter for the people that never had any heat or food to cook, or cooked food. So anyway, myself and my wife was there, and we found that there was nobody seemed to be helping much. Emergency Measures Organization was there, doing what they could, and so my wife and I, we was cooking the food and trying to help the people and figure out how many people was there and where they was coming from. And anyway, to make a long story short, to make a long story short, we come to find out it was stated that the Red Cross was supposed to have a contract signed with community services to take over in emergencies like this in the communities, I guess, all over Nova Scotia. But in Digby, for 2 different incidents that I was there personally, these Red Cross people never showed at any time. I'm just wondering if you could fill me in on that, and probably this House in on that, of what kind of contract that is, and is it just for non-emergencies, or how does it work? Because both emergencies, they never showed up there anyway. So maybe you could fill us in on that a little, please.
Thank you, Member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Honourable Member. We are searching through our documents to confirm, first of all, the financial contract with Red Cross, which I believe increased in 2005-2006 budget. But I'm going to go on my last briefing note, or at least my memory from my last briefing note, and that is that we pay them $72,000 a year to provide emergency food and shelter and clothing on behalf of the department across the province. They're the ones that are supposed to organize the volunteers, and I take note of what you're sharing with me. I know during White Wan, they certainly were on the scene in Kings County, because I went to some of those meetings, as you know, you're indicating you did down in your constituency, and they were busy trying to obtain beds and do what we're paying them to do. But I am concerned that they were not present in Digby County, and we will take that back and discuss it with them.
Sir? Member for Digby Annapolis.
If that's the case, if they didn't show up on an emergency like that, I know this was last November during the big power outage of the whole province. Then again over Christmas, between Christmas and New Year's was the last. We was out 3 days. A lot of homes were out of power down there, and but are these contracts honored? How are they honored? Are they paid per service, or are they paid that whole amount in 1 year?
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
It's what's the name for it? The term retainer. That is the retainer that is paid to them. And I just want to correct just a small detail in my previous answer. You have jogged my memory, Honourable Member. It was not White Swan where I encountered the Red Cross. It was the same storm. I think it was November the 13th and 14th. It was Saturday and Sunday, and we also were without power for some time in Kings County.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis.
Does what other organizations, if any, does the community service contract with? Is just the Red Cross the only one?
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister.
I think that what the member is asking me is, do we contract for emergency social services with any other organization? And the answer is no, it's just the Red Cross. But by way of informing the debate, we do have, of course, arrangements with just a multiple of organizations to deliver many services on behalf of the department to the clients we serve. So, for instance, the Kings Regional Rehabilitation Center is funded by the Department of Community Services. It is not part of the Department of Community Services, and their employees are not civil servants per se, but they are funded by the Department of Community Services. And there are many employers like that. You would have adult service centers down in your area, and group homes, and indeed through the Children's Aid Societies. They also are a delivery agent for the department. So we have many arrangements with other organizations, but to answer your question, which I think is about emergency social services, there's just one, and it's the Red Cross.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis.
I would like to share my time with Dave, or Dave, the member from Glace Bay. Thank you.
Recognize the Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How much time approximately do I have left, please?
About 13 minutes, or 9 minutes, actually.
I want to ask the Minister, I had a chance to ask the Minister several questions the other day concerning a couple of items in particular relating to the riding of Glace Bay. One was Brass Tack Industries, the other was Glace Bay Town Daycare. I did just briefly touch on a topic that I wanted to discuss further with the Minister, and I will take this opportunity to discuss that with him now. That's the situation regarding that was brought to his attention by the Nova Scotia Government Employees Union involving the caseload of workers, in particular at the Glace Bay office. The NSGEU had, I know they've met with me, they've met with other MLAs, and I believe that perhaps they may have met with the Minister. I know they've corresponded with the Minister anyway. It revolves around the issue of just how large the caseload is with individual caseworkers at the Glace Bay office. The NSGEU was saying that it's definitely in the hundreds, and because of that, there's a great deal of stress that is being felt by caseworkers who are under a tremendous amount of pressure in the Glace Bay office. As you probably are well aware, Mr. Minister, there would be in excess of 1,000 clients at the Glace Bay office for Glace Bay and surrounding area, which would translate into approximately between, close to 4,000 men, women, and children who would rely on benefits from the Community Services Department to exist on a daily basis. So perhaps if the Minister could, if he could explain to me What has transpired since the time that the NSGEU has brought this to his attention?
Thank you, Member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, I am familiar with some of the difficulties that were being faced by our Glace Bay office. And I think that it, as the Honourable Member might agree, it involved sick leave and long-term disability, which put added pressure on the remaining staff. And as a result of that, there was provision made for more staff to be brought into that office, and that was following a meeting with the regional administrator, Frank Capstick, and the Glace Bay staff, and they came up with a plan, and the feedback that I understand is coming back from that staff is they're happy with what's been done.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Chairman, perhaps the Minister could indicate to me then, not only in the Glace Bay office, but provincially, in particular in the Glace Bay office, but provincially, what is the average caseload per case worker in this province? How many cases, how many files are community services workers going into and dealing with on a daily basis? And also, well, we'll deal with that first, but I have a couple of other questions as well.
Thank you, Member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I have asked my staff to get their calculator out and do some divisions to give some approximate answers, but I would like to speak to this one. One of the things that has been a very positive development for our clients is that even though there has been a very significant reduction in the caseload in the department, it's now down around 32,000, and it seems to be stabilizing in and about that area, because the remaining clients have multiple barriers to employment, and it's more difficult to empower them to move into a job and become completely free of the need for employment support and income assistance. But we have not reduced the number of caseworkers, even though there has been a drop over time in the caseload. But the number of caseworkers is also divided up. Are they employment support caseworkers? Are they income assistance caseworkers? Is their clientele people with disabilities, which means that they have limited prospects for obtaining employment, and a fairly stable caseload? The point being that if it's just a question of processing a check every month, you can handle a pretty big caseload, as opposed to what I would say a more active caseload, where people are actively pursuing employment prospects, and there's a caseworker assigned to them through employment support services to complement the income assistance caseworker. That's assuming it's a larger office, and we've got that division of duties, which is normally the case. So it's not really that simple to say, you know, all clients are the same, because that's absolutely not the case. Everybody is individual, and they have their own unique needs, and we try to keep that flexibility in the system to accommodate them. And we've got some caseload numbers here, and I don't know if we've got an average, but 65. I'm going to let you ask your next question and just scrutinize the calculations.
Thank you, Minister. The member for Glace Bay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm sure the Minister will provide that number before the end of his time here. But in particular, he made reference to long-term disability, and that there would be workers off at the Glace Bay office on long-term disability. So if you're going to put the blame on workers, not the blame, but the responsibility on the fact that there are workers off on long-term disability, how many workers are you talking about that would be out on long-term disability at the Glace Bay office that would be the result, and would end up in the result being a higher caseload for workers in the Glace Bay office? Are you talking 1 or 2 or 3 or 15 workers that would be off on long-term disability?
Thank you, Member. The Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. That sort of detail would be known to the regional administrator. For my part, I'm aware of it because every time there's any hiring within the department, I have to sign off, even if it's a casual, and I am familiar with a number of forms that have come through from the Glace Bay office for those purposes, but to say that I would take a stab at a running count of what it would be at this point in time, I'm not comfortable making that sort of estimate, but if you want us to get that information for you, that would not be a problem, and staff are making notes now that they will obtain it. So you are looking for the number of people that are off on disability, either sickness or disability, at the Glace Bay office. Okay, have you got that?
Thank you, Minister. There's about 30 seconds remaining.
30 seconds? Yes, I think in all fairness, Mr. Minister, if you're going to say that the result of high caseloads at the office and the cause is going to be because some workers are off on LTD, then it would only be fair to provide the correct number, the exact numbers as to how many people are off on LTD and what's causing it. Because certainly that's not what the NSGEU is saying. That the staff, the stress there, and the problem with increased caseloads is not because if they're off on LTD.
Time has expired. Thank you. I'll recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth South Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was discussing the issue of the lack of a government strategy for poverty and how it impacts on women and children in this province. And I'd like to continue on that theme. It's interesting, the Nova Scotia Advisory Council on the Status of Women talks about the reality of being a woman in Nova Scotia today. We're 3 times more likely to work over 60 hours of unpaid work than men. The average income of a woman in Nova Scotia is less than $29,000 versus $40,000 for men. Women must have at least a certificate, a diploma, or a degree at the post-secondary level before they start earning what men earn when they graduate from high school. Over 18% of women in Nova Scotia lived below the poverty line in 2001, and that's about 4% higher than men. 61% of women who live alone are women. 61% of people who live alone are women, and 82% of widowed persons are women. 47.4% of female lone parents, single parents, live in poverty, compared to only about 20% for single parents who are men. And 60% of caregivers providing aid to elderly or disabled family members are women. And women also make up 75+% of those services and trades that make less money than men. So those are the facts. Can't argue with them. No. And at the same time that the Department of Community Services is increasing its administrative operating costs, we have people in this province who can't afford to eat adequate, nutritious meals on the low income rates that the department is providing them. And even the nonprofits who support low-income people who are clients of the department are struggling. And many of these people are in your care, Mr. Minister. So I'm wondering, whose responsibility is this to develop and implement a strategy to overcome poverty in this province? I mean, is this something that should be left up to the corporate world, to the nonprofits, to the media, to volunteers, those in need, the clients themselves? Well, I think we'd all agree that it really requires a visionary, caring government to take a leadership role in developing such a strategy. All those other groups and people certainly can be involved, but there needs to be a leadership role. And I would suggest that this government is not even recognizing the problem, let alone accepting the challenge and working towards a solution. I've mentioned before in this House that of all the Atlantic provinces, Nova Scotia saw the highest increase in food bank use of all the Atlantic provinces in 2004, last year, an increase of 46% since 1997. This means that every month, 40,000 people in this province have to use food assistance programs. And these could be food banks, they could be shelters, they could be meal programs or drop-in centers. And 41% of those 40,000 people are youth and children under the age of 18. Now this came, the other night I had the opportunity to take part in the Feed Nova Scotia annual dinner and auction. And it was a tremendous event, and I have to say that the staff and volunteers who organized it did a marvelous job. Over 400 people attended that dinner. And I found it quite interesting, I think I've mentioned this to the minister myself, that ironically, and I'm not sure how many personnel or staff from the department were actually at the dinner, but I found it quite ironic that I happened to be sitting next to two staff members from the Department of Community Services. And it was a wonderful opportunity to hear about their work, to share some of my concerns. I have to say that they were top professionals, very discreet, but they, they did seem to take seriously some of the issues and concerns that I was sharing with them, and I did appreciate that because that's not always the response when talking to others in the department. I had mentioned earlier before I sat down that the 2004 Nova Scotia Child Poverty Report Card was issued in the fall of last year. And 36,000 children in this province live in poverty. I mentioned also that majority of low-income families have to pay a disproportionate amount of their family income on affordable housing. And so they have to take this out of money that they would otherwise use for food, or money that they would use for over-the-counter prescriptions or clothing or treats for their children. And yet, in Nova Scotia, apparently over the last 3 years, we've only had 25 new affordable housing units in the whole province. 25, with the millions of dollars that came in the bilateral affordable housing agreement. And at the same time, this government cut nonprofit housing by $100,000. There's discrepancies here that just don't make sense. The need is getting greater, and the strategies and the policies to meet the need are decreasing. The average income shortfall in Nova Scotia is actually $662 a month. So I guess one could draw an assumption that the clients of community services who are getting the allowable rates should have that topped up by $662 a month in order to survive at a basic level of living standards. That's the highest, again, in Atlantic Canada. And this seems to be a continuing theme, that Nova Scotia is doing more badly than every other Atlantic Canadian province. And that's not something to be proud of. Last October, the minister announced a $4 increase in personal allowance for the clients under income support. And I believe this October there's going to be a $6 increase. So that's $10. We all know how prices have gone up. That money is just absolutely going to disappear down the hole of increased costs and inflated inflation, cost of living inflation. And yet at the same time, the government is giving tax breaks to huge corporations, profits which will, for the most part, be going to shareholders outside this province. That instead of investing in people who are residents and taxpayers here. You may be familiar with the Family Mosaic Project and this was a longitudinal study of 1- and 2-parent families in Nova Scotia. It was authored by Margaret Deckman, and it indicated quite clearly, quote, the long shadow that poverty casts over a family. And it goes on to indicate just how long-lasting and profound the effects of poverty are on families. It showed that poverty, the lack of stable housing, and low educational attainment are strongly related with poor academic performance in children, early school leaving, and teen pregnancy. You're probably aware, because of the bill that I introduced into the legislature this session, that there's a lot of concern about the social assistance policy that does not allow single parents, mostly women, to stay on social assistance and if qualified and if accepted by a university, to attend that institution of learning. And so this disproportionately impacts on women, but it also traps low-income women and their children into that poverty cycle. I mentioned the many factors that affect children and women in terms of their health and education. And I want to say here that even though today's focus is the Department of Community Services, there is enough blame to go around. And I do want to admit to the minister that a lot of the issues and problems that he and his department are dealing with are not solely the result of his department. And that's partly in recognition of the fact that there have been a number of changes and conditions that impact on other departments, which have prevented people from getting on with their lives, prevented them from attaining the health status that they need to increase their employability, to increase their education levels. And so those people do end up as part of the caseload of the Department of Community Services. You're probably familiar with the concept of population health, and the essence of it is that there are many factors impacting on each person in terms of their broad health. And these are all integrated, and there's just no one factor that leads to a cause for someone perhaps not to be able to look after themselves. So for example, if you have a department that hasn't provided intervention services for children, let's look at the education department, for example. When the severe educational cuts were made about 10 years ago, they cut out a lot of the middle management interventions in schools. So for example, there were long wait lists for speech therapy, long wait lists for resource people, long wait lists for people requiring counseling. And so as more and more people went through the system and didn't attain their potential, and the low rates of literacy, then often those are the same people who have poor health, who have poor marketable skills, and require a helping hand. And they're often people who end up at the door asking for programs and services from the department. There are all the other departments, in a way, share in the responsibility for what's happened to the citizens in this province. But I guess, in a way, that puts more responsibility on the Department of Community Services, because that is almost the level of last resort in terms of getting adequate, sufficient, effective help from a government department. And so when your social safety net is seen and the links are spreading apart and the holes are getting larger and people are following through, if the Department of Community Services isn't there to help secure those links, then that's when people completely fall through the system. I want to go on to mention the Campaign for Fairness. I think we're all familiar with the Premier and Cabinet and the government itself's concern that with equalization payments, that the offshore resources of Nova Scotia were not bringing an adequate return in terms of reinvestment into the province of Nova Scotia. And, I think we all share in the excitement that the offshore accord is perhaps going to even up the playing field on those resources. But it's interesting because I think about 70% of the past, current, and potential offshore revenue was going to be clawed back by the federal government. And the reason I sort of smile to myself is the irony, because that's exactly the breakdown in terms of the proportion of any extra income that's clawed back by the department when social assistance recipients want to earn a little extra money. So for example, if they, I think it's about, they can keep 30% supposedly as an incentive to work and supplement their rates, but 70% of that is clawed back. So for example, if you have a family who want to recognize a special birthday, perhaps buy Christmas gifts for their extended family, or send a child to church camp or something like that, the parent can go out and get a job, but they can only keep about 30% of their revenue. So I find it interesting that the Campaign for Fairness is accepted as an important value and principle in terms of intergovernment relationships with the federal government, but the provincial government doesn't turn that around and use the same values and principles in terms of their dealings with people living in poverty in this province, especially those being served by the Department of Community Services. It is ironic, yes. It's interesting also, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives said that in Nova Scotia, people with taxable income over $115,000, okay, $115,000, now pay for each additional dollar earned 29 cents in federal tax and 17.5 cents in provincial tax. So by contrast, again, the province of Nova Scotia cuts 70 cents in benefits from each additional dollar when a social assistance recipient with an income of $10,000 tries to get ahead. So there's a huge element of unfairness and inequality in all of this, and inconsistency. So one can hardly understand why something that seems fair to Nova Scotians in terms of the federal government cannot be turned around and applied to the citizens of that very province. The next issue I want to move on to is the whole issue of regulated child care. Now, this is an issue that's very dear to my heart. I've been involved on the periphery of it for over 30 years, but have had a chance to get immersed in it much more seriously since I was elected. And I found it interesting in my research to find out that in 2001, and I have to say, part of the reason that I have to use old statistics is because the Stats Canada, of course, tends to do its analysis after the fact, and we haven't had a recent census. And also, sometimes it's very difficult to get up-to-date information from the department on their analysis and figures. But I think this, even if there might be slight variation because of the time gap, I think this will show the trends. So in 2001, Nova Scotia allocated $12.9 million to regulated child care. And that broke down, these are not my figures, I'm getting this from reliable sources. That broke down to $91 for every child aged 12 and under. That's the lowest per child allocation in Canada at that time. And I would suggest that it probably hasn't changed very much in the intervening years. The same year, Quebec provided $980 per child. So that's $91 in Nova Scotia, $980 per child in Quebec. And we also have the dubious distinction of having the lowest percentage of children aged 12 and under in regulated care. And what does regulated care mean? I'm not suggesting that some of the informal care arrangements that parents in this province arrange with other family members or neighbors or friends or reliable people in their community. I'm not questioning those decisions or those situations. All I'm saying is that in regulated care, these are centers that are licensed by the Department of Community Services, and therefore they are regularly inspected, and they have to meet certain standards in terms of staff-child ratio. They have to meet safety and health standards, food nutrition standards. So there's a whole level of sort of guardianship in there that is permitted by the regulated licensing process. And yet in Nova Scotia, estimates range, it's difficult to get up-to-date figures, but estimates range that between 8 and 20% of children requiring child care in this province are in regulated care. So I'll leave you to draw the implications, but I find that a bit scary. And yet, 69% of children ages 12 and under in Nova Scotia have mothers in the workforce. 66% of children under 5 years of age have mothers in the workforce. So, you know, I understand that some people think, well, if a family or a person has a child, that's their responsibility. It's not society's, it's not the government's. Stay out of it. They make their own arrangements. It's their problem. Well, I'd like to suggest differently, because I find it interesting that when a child reaches 5 years of age, suddenly it is a public responsibility. And we invest millions and millions of dollars to make sure that they have as good an experience in public education as possible, that they attain their potential and they go on to be productive members of society, able to add to the tax base and take part in the economy. And yet children under 5 are ignored. Their needs and their families' needs. You know, some people flippantly say, well, you know, the mothers shouldn't work. Well, quite frankly, our economy in Nova Scotia could not survive the withdrawal of all the women who have children under 5 or children under 12 from the workforce. They make up a significant number of our professionals, our resource industries, our trade and retail. We couldn't survive as a province if these women were not in the workforce. So we do have a collective responsibility to provide safe, quality, affordable child care for these children. Quite frankly, our pensions, our standard of life, everything that we enjoy in this province depends on giving our youngest citizens the best chance possible to be productive members of their community. Now, it's interesting, getting back to the department, they've frozen the child care rates for people who who are under the Employment Support and Income Assistance Program at $400 a month. I'm not sure how long that rate's been there, but it's been frozen there for several years anyhow. That does not meet the actual costs of child care for income assistance clients. People who might be taking upgrading, training, or education programs or working part-time. So how are these clients, who we've already recognized are receiving at least over $662 less a month than they need to live on, how are these clients able to make up the difference? Well, in some cases they don't. They don't work. They don't take further education. They just accept their lot in life. And I think that's really depressing, that the one department that can encourage people to become self-sufficient puts such a minor barrier, one of many in their way. That is making the child care rates realistic so that they actually cover the costs. The Advisory Council on the Status of Women did a study or analysis of Stats Canada information called Paid and Unpaid Work. It's the Women in Nova Scotia statistical series. In 2001, the median monthly cost for centre-based full-time childcare in Nova Scotia was $565 for children under 17 months, $490 for children under 18 months, 18 months to 3 years, and $488 for children from 3 to 5 years. Now those monthly rates are all considerably higher than the base rate of $400, which this department has again frozen in this year's budget. The other area that I want to talk about, Mr. Chair, is the lack of accountability in the department. I raised this issue during budget estimates last year, that the department is actually mandated under the Family and Children's Services Act to do an annual review, have an annual review committee of the Act. This has not been done for several years, and it's mandated by the Act itself. The Minister himself has mentioned the number of organizations, non-government organizations, and I say special interest groups in the most positive sense of the term. We have a huge waiting list for the Standing Committee on Community Services. And I sincerely think that one of the reasons we have this backlog is so many of the nonprofit organizations that are supposedly working with and alongside the department to deliver both mandated and optional services in this province, and many of the associations that represent people like foster parents and others who are involved with the delivery of service in this province, are running into a roadblock with the department. There seems to be a problem with clear, timely communication. There seems to be a problem with getting concerns met in a reasonable length of time. And there's also concern about the delay in action and correspondence and meetings. And so I think, quite frankly, that a lot of these organizations are coming to the Standing Committee on Community Services because they appreciate the fact that members from all parties take their concerns seriously, treat them with respect, work with them to try to develop a motion or some suggestions as to what they should do next. And I think it was interesting. I believe last year in the business plan, the department suggested that they needed to improve the relationship with the nonprofit sector, especially those organizations helping them to do their service delivery. And I'm not sure if there's going to be any sort of accountability or evaluation of how successful that particular goal or objective has been. But I have to say that in terms of the request to the Standing Committee, we haven't seen much improvement. And so some groups are sort of bypassing the department because they're so frustrated with the delays, and they're working through our committee. Not that we regret doing that, but we just think that probably this is another area that the department needs to improve. And talking about the voluntary sector, I'd like to suggest that there seems to be a cat and mouse game going on here. And the department sort of dangles the hope or expectation in front of a lot of these organizations that they're going to get stable operating increases, operating fund increases. And then that sort of turns into, it sort of jerked, the expectation is jerked back, and there's a suggestion, well, we need to do a review on it, or we need to do, there's a renewal going on for that program, or we're going to do some consultation. And to many people's way of thinking, those terms, review, consultation, renewal, almost seem to be a code name for lack of resources going, delay in decision making. And a lot of organizations are getting frustrated, and yet the government could never afford to do these services themselves. Now, I'm thinking in particular about the transition houses and the women's centers. And this issue's been going on long before I got involved in politics. But I understand there was supposed to be a cut, and then there was some outrage from the sector and from the community. And so the department said, well, let's study. And they threw it back on those organizations, which also included the men's intervention programs. And they asked them to justify what they were doing. And considerable staff and volunteer time was spent on these studies. So they submitted the studies to the department, and they've sat there and sat there and sat there. There's not been much action. Now, I have to admit, there were $10,000 grants, one-time grants made to transition houses, I believe, this year. And but that hasn't stabilized their operating concerns, nor are the changing demographics and needs and priorities of rural communities being met here. A lot of because transportation, as everybody recognizes, is the #1 problem no matter where you live in Nova Scotia. A lot of people who want to access these emergency and employment services are not able to get to the women's houses and the transition centers and the places of study and training. And so a lot of those organizations would like to develop, some have actually, they found funding elsewhere, but they want to expand or develop their outreach programs so that they can take those programs and the counseling and the services to the women in the community, rather than forcing them to travel. Sometimes they can't get there, so it's actually broadening the number of people who would benefit from these organizations. And yet the new the funding that comes from the department doesn't recognize these changing demographics, as I said, these changing priorities and needs in rural communities. And quite frankly, the non-government organizations are getting frustrated. They it's harder for them to get people to serve on their board of directors. It's harder for them to get volunteers to work with organizations, and it's harder for them to get other volunteers and community members to support them in a financial way. So that's putting that whole community safety net, one that is interdependent with the department, at risk. And this is something that really has to be taken more seriously, because as I said earlier, the department could never afford to replace those community staff members, those community organizations, those community volunteers with paid public officials. There's no way that a province like Nova Scotia could afford to take over those programs and staff them with public servants. What do we got? 52. Yep. So I've been on my feet several times in the last week, and I've tried to use every opportunity possible to explain to the minister and the House why the NDP are so concerned, or particularly concerned, with the Department of Community Services. Because at the same time that these negative impacts and lack of opportunity and lack of being able to achieve their potential is happening to a significant number of citizens of this province, these things are happening. We have bonuses going to the deputy and middle managers, the highest bonus total of any department within this government. $13,200 to the deputy, $61,750 to the middle managers. Now, that may be deserved, but I think what citizens of this province and MLAs in this House deserve is to know what it was based on. What are these people being rewarded for? If it's for making life better for low-income people in this province, I would be the first to stand up and support a move like that. But if it is the result of a directive from goodness knows who, that we're trying to nickel and dime and save on, push people off social assistance, put people into cheaper accommodations. I've heard recently that some of the post-secondary training tuition fees are no longer being paid from the department. So if someone on social assistance who's perhaps in the employment support side wants to take a post-secondary program, now they're often being told that if their course is eligible for a student grant, then rather than as before, the department paying that fee, they're required to take, if they want to continue or go into that program or course, they're required to go to student loan. And this, on top of all the inadequacies of the support system for these people, is discouraging many of them from taking the program or the course. This is at the same time that the operating costs and the administrative costs for the department are going up, where they're increasing their IT, all kinds of things are happening. So the administrative costs are going up, and yet people are hurting more and more. The minister stated that it was a good year for the department and therefore for its clients. And I want to challenge that statement, and I want to challenge its assumptions, because I know it hasn't been a good year for the clients. And I see the proof of that every day. Several months ago, I called the minister's office, and I had a situation which involved a bright, young, energetic, interesting young woman. And I just felt her story was so unique and yet typical of the potential that's being lost by many of the policies and programs of the department. I was trying to set up an opportunity for this young woman to talk directly to the minister. And I was told that the minister doesn't talk to clients of community services. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, who is he talking to? Now, admittedly, he has his own constituency office, and I'm sure that some of these problems have been raised by people who come through his door. But they're being raised every day in my constituency office and those of my colleagues on this side of the House. And we are trying to work with them to work through the system that's there to try to resolve some of these issues. And I have to say, it is very, very frustrating. Now, this sounds like a long litany of complaints. And as you well know, I'm actually a very positive person. And I usually see a glass as half full rather than half empty. And I have to admit, it's taken me a year and a half to get to this point of frustration. But everything I see seems to indicate that the department is gradually becoming a barrier to citizens of this province who want to have a better life for themselves. So they're becoming part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And that terrifies me, because if the Department of Community Services is not the department that has clear, fair, caring policies and legislation, then it's almost as though they want to write off a certain segment of our population. And I find that offensive, and I find that very, very unfortunate. So I want to say that my party and me would be very interested in trying to work through some of these issues and challenges within the department and try to make it more of a support for vulnerable people in our province. But we cannot sit by and just accept that the wait lists grow longer, the services and programs are not available, that that these people don't count. Well, they do count. They're our neighbors. They're family members. There are people who love them in their communities, and they deserve to be treated with the greatest respect. They deserve to have the highest level of programming and services in place to support them. And certainly we would like to ensure that that happens. How much time do I have left, Mr. Chair?
You have approximately 27 minutes.
Pardon?
You have 27 minutes.
I thought I had 37 minutes.
You started at 4:15, member.
Mm-hmm.
And there was,
Well, I understood I had to 4:52. I can keep going, but you're saying I have more time, are you? Okay. Okay, well, I think I'll go into my next phase, and then I'll give the minister a chance to talk. I have some questions. Yes, I do.
You have the answers. That's the other part.
Okay, I referred earlier to the cut in staff, 18 from the employment support and income assistance and 15 from housing services. And yet in the business plan, it indicates that there's a staff increase of 56. So if my addition and subtraction is correct, there should be 89 new positions. So I'm just wondering if you could give me some indication of what programs and where those new positions are going to be.
thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I am going to address the member's question, but I want to advise the NDP party that they have gone on without giving me a chance to address some of the suggestions that they've been making about the department, and before I'm done, I will be addressing those before my closing remarks. So, but you are asking a question about staff. Earlier on, you had suggested, I believe, that there had been cuts in program delivery staff, and I just want to unequivocally say that's not so. What you are referring to now is a reorganization within head office to create a new division that targets program and operations support. But that's a head office function. It has nothing to do with the actual program delivery out in the regions. And your question about what's going on with staffing levels at head office, which I believe is your last question, all revolves around the reorganization and putting those people that are involved with program and operations support under one division.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South Portland Valley.
Well, I would love to continue the questioning because, quite frankly, I have some other important topics to ask the minister about. But I really believe that my time is up, and so I'm going to.
The Honourable Member started at 4:15. That's when you commenced.
Yes, but we've had eight hours on community services between the two parties, and I don't feel it's fair to eat into other estimates. So I would
very well, member.
give up
Thank
the
you.
floor.
And I'll recognize the Honourable Minister of Community Services for closing remarks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, to the Honourable Member, on the supplementary detail on page 411, all the specifics about the breakdown and the shifts of staff within the department is there, and it goes down into the minute detail of everything that has taken place. There are a lot of suggestions that have been made in the Honourable Member's presentation and those of previous speakers from the NDP that I guess I have to challenge the premise of those allegations. And I'd like to start by looking at it globally. But even before I go there, I want to talk about people that we serve in this department, because the most gratifying part of being Minister of Community Services has been to get out and meet the people that we are there to serve. I've not only met clients, I've met service organizations, advocacy groups, staff. There are a lot of incredible people, both as clients, families, staff, that are there to support the people served by the Department of Community Services. And I don't think you could ever put a number on that, or the honor that it's been to be minister. I can recall last December, I got an invitation from the Salvation Army to go to their annual Christmas dinner. And I doubt if a Minister of Community Services has done that before. Nobody indicated to me that was the case. And I wasn't able to stay for the entire dinner, but I did go to the church service, and this was on Gottingen Street. And I went in there, and there were people from all walks of life, and some of them clearly had a rough life. And it was the day before the $11 million announcement for the strategic infrastructure funding, and so I was able to bring the message that 2/3 of that was going to be going to various forms of affordable housing. I didn't give numbers. I just said that a good thing was going to happen the next day, and this was a priority. And the reaction that I got from the people attending the service, I'm not talking about the Salvation Army staff, I'm talking about, in many cases, you would call them as street people, or certainly people that were on the margin. It was phenomenal. It was one of the most uplifting experiences I've ever had in my life, trying to leave there. Everybody wanted to talk to me, shake my hand. They were so appreciative that I came. And that, I would just say, is one of the instances that I will always cherish. Comments from people that have devoted their lives to serving these people, unsolicited comments, Christmas cards. Remember one that from one gentleman that works in that area started off by saying he never writes to politicians, but he was going to make an exception with me. I kept that card. Sometimes, like as what happened here on Tuesday, I think back on it when your leader, who has done very little to advance the causes of the clients and community services, got up and made a personal attack on me, and then one of your senior members made an attack on the staff in the Central Region. I thought about that letter, and he was actually making reference to when you have those days and how appreciative he was that I was there. This was a minister. And I take that as probably being a better barometer of how I'm seen by the people that were served by the department. But the opposition party, the NDP, may take a different point of view, and that's their perfect right. How they express it is that is up to them, and ultimately, depending on what happens on Monday, it'll be up to the people in Nova Scotia if they like to support that type of behavior. Within the department, last year, the Department of Community Services, probably for the first time in history, had the second largest increase in the budget of any department, second largest next to health. $28 million, that's net, because the actual gross increase was larger, but we do give some recoveries to offset the increases. And this year we had the third largest, which is what you'd expect for the third largest department at $22 million. Now that does not include the extra $20 million that Cabinet has now agreed to in the bilateral agreement with the federal government. And those are federal dollars, but they are going to be invested through the Department of Community Services and the child care sector, which is a wonderful group of people who have met together, and I've got to say that it was under my direction that the commercial and the nonprofits had to come together. I was not prepared to meet with them as separate entities because they're all there serving the same families, the same children. Now, the families may choose whether they go to a nonprofit or to a commercial if they have that opportunity in their community that they actually have a choice. But ultimately, we're all going to work together for the good of the children and families that are served under that program. And it was kind of a novel idea, I think, to some of them, and they were a little tentative when they came. But again, it was one of the most positive meetings that I've ever attended in my life. And the deputy met on a regular basis as co-chair with them. And the other chair was Elaine Ferguson of Child Care Connections. And they had made tremendous progress on coming to common ground. The member spoke about an anti-poverty policy. Well, the government is working on a social policy framework. Poverty clearly is a significant component of that. And I think the member did acknowledge that poverty is not unique just to the Department of Community Services. It is a societal problem. However, we certainly have a role to play in it, and it's an important one, and it's one that I'm proud to advocate on our clients' behalf and anybody that may someday need to be a client of the Department of Community Services. It's a great honor. I would also suggest that part of this province's success over the last number of years, which has increased our provincial revenues, but it's also helped reduce the number of people that are on employment support and income assistance, is a vibrant economy. 38,000 new jobs is the best first step to helping able-bodied people that are on employment support and income assistance. Now, when the water rises, not all boats rise at the same pace, and that's why we have a social safety net. The Department of Community Services is a part of that. The member made reference to the fact she wanted me to see one of her constituents, a smart young woman that she wanted to have me meet. I do meet some constituents, but as a general policy, it's not the role of the Department of Community Services to be a caseworker. I mean, we've got thousands of clients, and yes, I certainly do see some cases in my own constituency. That's part of having a constituency office, one of the things that I think drives us all to run in the first place. But it is my responsibility to make sure that the staff are in place, the programs are there, we fund them, and that there's avenues of appeal when there are difficulties. I've made reference to some of the wonderful groups that I've met, and I hope my staff would forgive me if I was to share their apprehension when the Community Advocates Network wanted to meet me shortly after becoming minister. They weren't too sure about this, but I was. I wanted to meet them. We set up, I don't know whether it was an hour and a half, and I had something in the middle of the afternoon that was supposed to take me away that wasn't crucial. I mean, it was more of a, social function where we all get those invitations, and it wasn't really crucial that I be there. I think I was there with them for 3.5 hours, and it was a great first start. It was the best investment of time that I think a new minister could ever make in this department. And I was very touched by some of the comments of these dedicated people afterwards. And you know many of these people, Honourable Member. So the portrayal that your leader made of me as minister seems to contradict what other people are telling me, but I obviously have a subjective view, and I look to others for their feedback, their reaction. And as I said in this opening comments, that has actually been one of the most gratifying things about being in this position, is having a chance to meet with these people. You talked about the clawback and the employment support and income assistance system and how to describe the amount of water in this glass. I think that you've got to bear in mind that whether the glass is half full or half empty has a lot to do with where you are relative to where you were before. So if we can take family, maybe a single person, and we can put the supports in place that allow them to take that step to gain their own job, the independence, the self-esteem that comes with it, the role model that they then become to their children, which is important to all our clients, because I do not appreciate people that come and suggest that people choose to be on community services. We have good clients. What they really want is a chance to better their situation. And that's why employment support services is such an important component of employment support and income assistance. A fundamental change that came into place on August the 1st of 2001 when the program, the regulations became effective. And this past year, we invested $17 million in our clients to increase their employability, to overcome the multiple barriers to employment. And when they get there, they can only go one way but up. It is not an easy time to be depending on the budgets that you get from employment support and income assistance. But every dollar they earn betters their situation by 30 cents on the dollar, over and above what they were before. So if they earn $1,000 in a month, they've got an extra $300, which makes a tremendous difference for that family. And as I related earlier, because some of you were making fun of the fact that at one point in time in my life, when my business was struggling because of the downturn in the fishery, and my family had to eat pasta, and we had to use powdered milk to dilute the liquid milk because we could not afford to give our 5 boys fluid milk like so many other people in this province, which seemed to amuse some members of the opposition. But they didn't know that I was talking about my circumstance, perhaps, when they were mocking me for suggesting that pasta is one way of stretching a budget. Anyway, if you can make an extra $300 a month, that moves you up the food chain. It means that you can rent some movies, perhaps for your children. Perhaps you can enroll them in organized sports. Of course, there's kids' sports. That's another $350, which is available to community services clients and to low-income Nova Scotians, so that they can have the same advantages as other low-income children, all children, to be clear. That's a wonderful program. As a former hockey and soccer coach, I just am delighted that the Minister of Health Promotion has been able to increase his budget in that area to help children that previously were denied the chance to play in organized sports to actually participate. A couple of weeks ago, I was in the Captain William Spry Centre. Youth in Care were launching their latest issue of Voices, which is written by youth that have a story to tell. It's a wonderful organization. The children are just terrific. And did it ever pull at my heartstrings when one youth got up and talked about how he wasn't able to participate in hockey because he didn't have the money, or his, well, I guess it'd be his either his foster parents or the group home. But you know, now there would at least be $350 available to him over and above whatever was there. So that's a good thing. And that's an initiative of this government. Child care. You made reference to the difference between Nova Scotia and Quebec. There's a big difference between Nova Scotia and Quebec. Yes, and Quebec puts a phenomenal amount of money into child care, and good for them. But what Nova Scotia does with its child care dollars is we targeted them to low-income families to try to level the playing field. In Quebec, They make no distinction, so it's tougher on low-income families and it's easier on high-income families. We're not like Quebec, and I'm not criticizing Quebec. They've put an enormous amount of money into childcare, and again, good for them for making it a societal priority. But in Nova Scotia, with the dollars we do have, we target it to low-income families first. And with the announcement today that we're now able to move forward and sign the agreement with the federal government, this is going to make an enormous difference for low-income families. And my commitment to the people in Nova Scotia is that they are going to become first and foremost in divvying up that additional $20 million. I wanted to see the end of waiting lists for families that otherwise would qualify for subsidized daycare. If you qualify, you should have it. There should be no question, and more families should have access. You made reference to nonprofit childcare centers, and you spoke about how they were carefully regulated by the province. I want Nova Scotians Okay. I am being advised by the member that she was not selecting out the nonprofits, and she was right, because my point is that all regulated child care centers receive the same scrutiny from the department, because we want families, we want parents to know that when they send their children to a regulated child care center, they can count on a certain level of professionalism in caring for their children, regardless of whether it's commercial or nonprofit. I thank the member opposite for clarifying that. Transition houses. Yes, outreach programs, that's something that in many cases would be appropriate. And that's why, through my assistant deputy minister, who's a wonderful person, she's a very, very good people skills, she has very good people skills, is working with the transition houses across the province, trying to come up with agreements as to how they're going to serve their community, because every community is unique. There's no two that are exactly the same. And there is additional money in the grants to augment their budgets when they do sign a new service agreement. We want to know what services are being provided by them and have some comfort, after discussing with them, that they're the right services for that community. And if that's a crime, we're guilty. But I think most people would say that was appropriate. Obviously, there's been two different approaches taken by the two opposition parties. The NDP has chosen to get up and basically what we normally just call filibuster. The number of questions I've gotten from the NDP, you probably could put on 10 fingers. The Liberal Party has chosen to take this time and ask questions and to make some points, but it's been more of a balance. This is your chance, on behalf of the people of Nova Scotia, to ask the pertinent questions to me as minister, with my senior staff here, and get answers. You've chosen not to take advantage of that during the estimates. Your tactic, as clearly evidenced by your leader, was more to take personal attack on my character, and Nova Scotians can judge me. That's not a problem. We're all elected people. And if I'm found not to be a good minister, not to be a good person, I should not be in public life. And I would accept that decision. I find it regrettable, though, that that was the method that was chosen by the NDP, as shown in particular by their leader, to bring this forward. So my observations is not only during the estimates, but also during question period, letters, and personal approaches. These are all ways that you can affect policy. I have made reference to the questions that came from last year's estimates and previous years, and how it has impacted the development of policy. Now, maybe it would have happened anyways, but the point is that I try to be gracious that when opposition members make good points and government policy reflects that, regardless of why it's in there, is that I'm quite happy to share the credit with them. I made reference to the member from Dartmouth North, his concern about accessibility in her awarding of affordable housing projects. And it's being done. And I give that member some of the credit. He brought it up. Whether it would have been done anyways, it really doesn't matter. The point is, the member brought it up, I listened to him, and you had that opportunity as a party to do that again this year. Instead, you chose to get up and make speeches, and not so much the last 45 minutes or however the honourable member spoke, but earlier, the speeches tended to be very critical, and there were a lot of errors in fact in the speeches, which I am now trying to go through and address, at least the outstanding ones that I didn't get to do earlier. So there was a pronounced lack of questions in the estimates. Not a lot of questions during question period. My gracious, I get half as many questions as the previous minister did in question period. Now, either you don't have concerns or you've got other priorities, but if you really have concerns, which you feign to have as a party, this is your chance to bring them out. And you chose not to do that. You have to take responsibility for not asking the questions. Letters. You send some letters. That's good. I try to respond to your letters. I always read what you send me. It's always given consideration. And sometimes I change the responses. And you can always approach me personally. There's not a member in this House that has ever been turned away when they approach me with a concern. And I don't see that changing, including the Leader of the Opposition. Despite how he behaves towards me, I will not reciprocate and behave in the same manner towards him. Honourable member, the member from Dartmouth South, I want to tell you.
Recognize the point of order. Recognize the honourable member from Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. On a point of order, I think that it's really important that the minister understand that the time of this House belongs to the members to represent the people of their constituencies in the way that they know their constituents want to be represented. It's not up to the minister to tell the members of the opposition what their role is in this place. And if the members of the opposition want to stand up and lay out the problems of the minister and his leadership in his department, then they have the fundamental right to do that. And we do not need to know from the minister that he thinks this time is for questions. And the Minister of Education knows this full well as well, this is the job of the opposition.
Order. It's not a point of order. I'll recognize the honourable minister to please continue your dissertation.
I appreciate the honourable member has come in.
Point of order, the honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member from Halifax Needham was trying to defend an attack on a minister in this House that in my 6 or 7 years in here is the worst I have ever seen. There was no excuse for it, and for her to stand up here and try and defend that attack simply puts her down at that level.
I can see where this is going to continue. I'll recognize the honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I would say to the minister, on a point of order, Mr. Chair, the emails and the phone calls that are coming into my office certainly support the concerns that we have expressed here about the approach of the Minister of Community Services to his department. So I will defend our actions to the people of this province and not to the Minister of Education.
Order. The honourable minister I will allow you to continue your dissertation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the fact the honourable member has come in and spoken. Mr. Chair, one of the most personally disappointing things I've ever seen in any member in this House, which I have not shared publicly, actually happened with this member. About a year and a half ago, I encountered a 16-year-old girl that clearly had just run away from home. She was in the street corner. It was Sackville and Barrington Street. And you know something? I was 48 years old. I'm a man. She was sitting on her knapsack, and she had vulnerable and gullible written all over her. She was in danger. This is awkward for somebody my age. The member's laughing. She thinks it's funny. What happened, people of Nova Scotia, is that member was asked, after I had tried to help this girl, tried to find out if she was hooked in with Phoenix House, whether she had been to the shelters, found out quite a bit about her, actually, in terms of her family situation. I asked that member to go and help her. And she told me she would go and help her, because as a woman, I thought she could probably do more for me. And I would just say, honourable member, is that she did not go and help her. But fortunately, the people from Phoenix House basically put out a dragnet based on some very sketchy descriptions on my part and found her.
Point of order, the Halifax member for Halifax Needham.
Would the minister entertain a question?
The minister entertain a question?
No.
Then please proceed with your remarks.
And my worst fears were...
Order. The honourable member from Halifax Needham on a point of order.
As far as I know, the Minister of Community Services is responsible for people in this province who are homeless and on the streets. I have no idea about the incident that he's referring to, but as far as I can tell, he is the minister who is responsible for community services. And it's his responsibility to go back to his department in a situation like the one he just describes, I would think, and speak to any of the numerous social workers that would be employed in this department with the capacity to deal with that kind of problem. And certainly, that's what I would have told the minister, but I have no idea what he's referring to, Mr. Chair.
Order. The honourable member, please continue.
Yes, all I asked was that she would go and try to assist this young lady, and she told me that she would do so after the Chamber of Commerce luncheon. And fortunately, the people from Phoenix House were able to track her down. They basically put a dragnet out, and there was a problem, and somebody did have designs on her. And if you're an attractive young 16-year-old girl that's just run away from home, I can tell you those designs are not appropriate. Anyways, I would suggest that it was profoundly disappointing that when I asked on a personal basis whether you would assist a young woman, you told me that you would assist her and you chose not to follow through. That's something that you can explain.
We have a point of order from the member for Halifax Needham. Please proceed.
On a point of personal privilege, Mr. Chair, I would say that the Honourable Minister has just imputed some kind of motive with respect to my reputation and my privilege in this legislature. And Mr. Chair, I would like a ruling on the allegation that the minister has made here. He made an allegation. I stood in my place on a point of order and said I knew nothing about what he's speaking of, and the minister continued to stand up. In fact, he embellished further his allegations. So on a point of personal privilege, I would like to have a ruling, Mr. Chair, on this, a retraction at the least.
My ruling, honourable member, is that it's not a point of order, it's a dispute between two members, and I'll ask the honourable Minister of Community Services to please complete his closing remarks.
I would just say...
Point of order, I see another point of order, the honourable member for Dartmouth South, on a point of order. Portland Valley, sorry, member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if it's point of order, point of privilege, but I'm feeling very uncomfortable with the level of discussion currently, and I'm wondering if it's possible to have a 5-minute break so that, as a woman in this House, I'm finding that this level of discussion has deteriorated to the point where I feel uncomfortable, and I think I have a right as an MLA to ask for a break so that cooler heads can prevail.
Hear, hear. The Honourable, and I will rule that we will continue with the Minister of Community Services. Please complete your remarks,
Just
Minister.
to conclude that, I did not bring it up until this time. I think in view of what happened on Tuesday and the comments from the particular member, perhaps I felt required some sort of response. Tim Crooks, who's the executive director of Phoenix House, is well familiar with this case, as is his staff. So if there's some question as to the facts of the case, I would suggest that you can look outside of this chamber for corroboration. The housing authorities. There was concern on the part of the honourable member from Dartmouth South about the maintenance there, and that is why we put an extra $1 million first in last fall and then an extra $4 million into the housing authorities. It is something that we want to do better on, and when I had the opportunity to put more money into the maintenance, it was done. You made reference about cheaper accommodations sometimes driving the decisions about where we place children. I can assure you that's not the case. Children are always placed where it's in the best interest of the child. And just to give an example, the province actually spends anywhere from, well, it would be zero if a child successfully adopted out, and that's the best possible scenario for the child. But for some children that end up in group homes, the cost of caring for that child can go anywhere up to $175,000 per child. Foster homes are better than group homes if we can find one for them. We've already dealt with staff. There's not been a single cut in program delivery staff, not a single cut. But there was a reorganization at head office. Now, the member from Dartmouth North the other day was speaking about overpayments and specifically his concerns about how we proceeded with clawbacks, and I think that it's important to note that overpayments are incurred when, often when it's a Canada Pension Plan disability situation, and whatever is taken back from the client is, first of all, it's capped at a maximum of $45, but it can go down to zero depending on their circumstances. And if they no longer are a client of the Department of Community Services, those accounts go to Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, but still, their ability to pay has everything to do with what they expect the clients to pay. There was also a suggestion that when we went with the National Child Benefit Program, that we no longer supported children through the Employment Support and Income Assistance Program. And that's not so. We recognize them in the shelter allowance, we recognize them as under special needs, and we recognize them under pharmacare. Plus, if you're to compare what the national child benefit would be for a low-income Nova Scotian child, currently it's $263.65 per child. With the increase in the basic personal allowance, it's going to $190. It's currently $184. So clearly, the children are cared for their food, their clothing, their basic personal effects out of the national child benefit. That's the purpose for the national child benefit. It's there. There was...
Order, the honourable member for Dartmouth North on a point of order.
Just on a point of order, Mr. Chairman, and I don't want to belabor this because I do know that time is expiring and going on, and I just wanted to make the point that with the additional revenues that come through the NCB, the National Child Tax Benefit, that in fact those revenues in the $180, which is now moved to $184, and now we'll have an additional dollars that will go to $190, are basically assigned to personal allotments only, and that's to the adult portion of the family. And now how you calculate that, Minister, in to being part of the children's component is, as I don't know, because that goes to the remaining members of the adult family for their money, and that money is not only for food, but it's for personals as well. So the $180 is a personal allowance.
Order, the honourable member, you have the floor, the honourable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, the member's absolutely right. What I said was there's still a component in there in shelter, special needs, and pharmacare for children. So if you have a single person that's on employment support and income assistance, their apartment budget today is $235. It's going to $285, but it's not enough. The point is if they now become a single person with a child, it goes to $550. That's because of the child. That's my point. Children are still recognized as part of the budgeting process, not in the basic personal allowance. That's addressed by the National Child Benefit.
Excuse me once again on a point of order, Mr. Chair.
Is it point of order or a question to the minister? Thank you, member.
That prior to any national child tax benefit, any other entities at all, historically that was always the component and that was always the nature of structure under the Department of Community Services, both at the municipal level and at now the provincial level, which since 1995 has taken over everything.
Thank you, member. The honourable minister, Community Services.
There was mention of McDonald Hall, which is the new facility for people with disabilities in Inverness, and the suggestion was that it was made it as a larger center instead of having a couple of smaller ones. In actual fact, the community wanted the larger center because they were together, they're like a family, and they wanted to stay together, and this was the wish of those residents and the wonderful people that are volunteers on the board of McDonald Hall. And I was at the opening. It was great to meet some of the residents of McDonald Hall and the volunteers that had worked so hard to make it happen and bring Inverness this wonderful new facility. So the concern is that we were moving them into larger centers. In actual fact, this was the wish of the residents and the board to have one facility. There was also talk about the waiting lists and what we're doing for people with disabilities. And last year, we introduced 3 new programs or enhanced them. The direct family support, as I've spoken of before, which supports families to keep adult children with disabilities or sons and daughters at home. Supervised apartments for those that are almost able to make it on their own. They just need some supervision. And we're looking forward to also rolling out the alternative family support program, which provides a loving family for an adult with a disability that can perhaps no longer live with their parents because their parents are growing older and no longer able to care for them. I want to thank the Liberals for the way that they've taken advantage of this opportunity. This is, my view of how estimates work. You asked a lot of questions, good questions, and they were pertinent to your concerns per policy or per your constituency. The NDP chose a different approach. They wanted to get up, make points. It's their perfect right to do so. I would have appreciated if I could have responded to some of the suggestions they were making about what was going on in the department and perhaps provide some information that would have given them a greater sense of comfort, but I was not afforded that opportunity, and it is the perfect right to get up and speak at length without interruption. They did personally single me out for a lot of criticism, and that's their right. And I don't really take as much offense to criticizing me personally. That's something that happens in politics. It brings us all down. People don't like it, and they blame us all, but it happens here in this chamber. I did not appreciate the comments about my staff in Central. I did appreciate the comments from the Liberal Party about their working relationship with my staff. And I note that there's a contrast. So if it's so good for the Liberal members, why is it so bad for the NDP members? And Nova Scotians are going to have to ponder that, but I think that when you have something positive to say about somebody, it's good to say it. They appreciate it, and I really felt that those comments were uncalled for the other day, and I challenged the member from Halifax Needham on them at the time, and we had a little exchange. I guess that I would say that the NDP, and particularly the leader, are questioning my competence as a minister, and people that have watched this, they can make their own judgments. But in the opening statement, with all due respect, I say to the honourable critic, you asked me a question about the fact that we'd gone from a business plan, or from an accountability report to a business plan. Well, they were always there. I mean, one goes with the other, and you're questioning my competence as a minister, and you don't understand something that's as fundamental to the running of the department, that we always have a business plan and there's an accountability report. And you have to take some ownership for that. So if you're pointing your fingers at me, I think that you might, consider your own position. Also, the interesting point that was brought up from the member from Dartmouth North, that somehow or other management staff in the Department of Community Services should be treated differently from all other departments and not be considered for performance bonuses. I want the best people in the Department of Community Services. We are serving the most vulnerable people in this province, and it's really important to me that we have the best people in place. And if you have the best people in place, you got to pay them. I was somewhat amused by the leader's offense to my tabling clippings about his past statements. Somebody has got to make you accountable just as you make us accountable every day in question period. This is your opportunity to make us accountable. If you're going to go out and make statements, if you're going to make your priorities something other than the people served by the Department of Community Services, and you put that on paper, and you come in here 2.5 years later and you rail about the department and me, I think it is fair ball to point out that you have a track record of not making the people of conservative community services a priority. It's not that some of you do not care about them, but your leader, during his time as leader, has not made it a priority of your party. You can check what you had in the last election. You can check what he said when he ran for the leadership. It was not a priority. And I would suggest that no leader in the NDP has made this less of a concern, because I think traditionally your party is a party that is affiliated with sticking up for the plight of the poor. And I would say there's a change. under his leadership. He's critical of the way I run the department, but yet he makes an amendment to strip my salary without checking out the consequences. And Mr. Dexter said he never intended the vote to be one of non-confidence in the government, but he's criticizing me for non-confidence, and I would table that. I am just going to say that a lot of thank yous do come with this position. The people that I work with, whether they be in child care, emergency shelters, employment support, and income assistance, the clients that got an increase that had never seen one before, and their caseworkers that care and get the feedback from them, people with disabilities, the advocacy groups, staff, and the compensation comes from their appreciation. In closing, Mr. Chair, again, I appreciate the chance to have been here in estimates. Again, I acknowledge the Liberal Party's professionalism. I respect the NDP's approach that they do not have to ask questions. So in closing, Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to move Resolution 2. Therefore, be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $716,174,000 be granted to the Lieutenant Governor to defray expenses in respect of the Department of Community Services pursuant to the estimate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Shall the resolution stand? Resolution stands. I'll recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, would you please call the estimates of the Department of Transportation and Public Works?
Okay, we'll call the estimates of the Department of Transportation and Public Works, and we'll allow a few moments there for the staff, minister staff, to assume their appropriate positions. Okay, and I'll recognize the Honourable Minister of Transportation when he's ready to start.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Actually, we've only got about 14 minutes to the moment of interruption, so perhaps I can introduce my staff after we get back after the moment of interruption, and start off with my opening remarks. No. Mr. Chairman, it's indeed a great pleasure to have the opportunity. Oh, my staff has arrived. You want to get over there? Mr. Chairman, before I start my remarks, I will introduce the two gentlemen with me. On my right is a gentleman I'm sure that every member in this House knows quite well, the Director of Operations, the Director of Highway Operations within the Department of Transportation and Public Works, Mr. Martin Delaney. And on my left, we have Greg Penny, who looks after the finances of the department. And over the period of the next several hours, I guess, we'll have other members in the gallery who will accommodate other aspects of the department. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, along with being Minister of Transportation and Public Works, I'm also the Minister responsible for the Insurance Act and Sydney Steel Corporation, which of course includes the Sydney tar ponds. I'd like to start with the Department of Transportation and Public Works. As you likely know, there are three major sections to Transportation and Public Works. There's highways, there's public works, and government services. And straight away, Mr. Chairman, I want to acknowledge and thank the people who work for the department, both public sector and private sector workers. These workers do an excellent job and deserve positive recognition for their efforts on behalf of all Nova Scotian taxpayers. The 2005-2006 budget, which we are going to be considering in the next little while, is a good budget for the Department of Transportation, and I would suggest that it is a great budget for Nova Scotians. The Nova Scotia government will spend $50 million more on roads than it collects in gas tax revenue this year, and that is a watershed that we have surpassed, Mr. Chairman. For many years we've had. Does the honourable member want the floor? Mr. Chairman, as I was saying, this marks a remarkable achievement where we've gone from a deficit from gas revenues of approximately $90 million in our expenditures to today we're now $50 million in excess of the money that we bring in on gas tax revenues. We are investing $307 million to maintain and improve Nova Scotia's highways, roads, and bridges for the benefits of all Nova Scotians. Since 2000-2001, this government has more than tripled TPW's capital budget. This means more twinned highways throughout Nova Scotia and improvement in our secondary roads. We are adding $44 million in combined operating and capital funding in 2005-2006 to make our roads safer and smoother. The government has earmarked $30 million in new capital spending just for highways. TPW intends to spend this $30 million repaving our secondary roads throughout the province. In other words, Mr. Chairman, the additional $30 million that we're getting from the government for expenditure on highways this year, that $30 million will be going to the secondary road system, not to the 100 highway system. As you know, Mr. Chairman, the government has also earmarked another $30 million in capital spending on highways for next year. Now, by anyone's standards, $60 million to improve highways throughout this province is outstanding. Overall, Transportation and Public Works capital budget for 2005-2006 is about $161 million. This includes close to $143 million for highways, another $16 million for capital construction on buildings, and $1.7 million for corporate information technology support and public safety communications upgrades. We recognize and acknowledge that not every road in this province is perfect, and Mr. Speaker, I don't take pride in telling people that, but it's a fact. Our road system does require substantial investment by the government, and I think that over the past 3 or 4 years, we've started getting the additional funding that we need to do that. And as I've said in this House on many occasions, Mr. Chairman, you can add money to the health budget, but it doesn't guarantee that you're going to get better health services. You can do the same thing in education. You can put more money into education, but you're not necessarily going to get a better education system. But if you put more money into the highway system, Mr. Chairman, it does result in better roads. It results in better roads right across this province, and you see something indeed substantive for the investment that you've made. I don't think Nova Scotians expect perfection, but I do think that they will appreciate that $60 million over 2 years will go a very long way in improving our secondary highway network. This extra capital also means extra work for our CUPE employees. We are adding about 100 full-time equivalent staff this year, and this means more hours Mr. Chairman, for our QP workers. Technical staff in the department will be added as well. Much of what we are dealing with today is a result of neglect from yesterday. And by yesterday, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, I mean the 1900s. Our highway infrastructure is vital. We need good roads to get products to market, to safely transport children to and from school, and to give tourists another good reason to come back and revisit this province. We are clearly investing a lot of money to improve Nova Scotia's road network. The result of these increased investments are evident. New bridges, new twinned highways, new pavements, and new pavement are making our roads and bridges stronger and providing new opportunities for communities and businesses. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to speak for a moment on some of the highlights of our recent work. Work will begin this construction season on twinning Highway 101 from St. Croix to Avonport. The twinning of 103 from Otter Lake to Tantallon is progressing and scheduled to open next year. Work will continue on Highway 103 at Barrington in Shelburne County. The Sydney River Bridge is being widened, and later this year the Cox Heath interchange will open. The department is planning to twin Highway 125 from Balls Creek to Sydney River, and that project is continuing. The department continues to replace its single-lane truss bridges in Nova Scotia. We'll spend $13 million to replace more than 8 bridges this year. In fact, Mr. Chairman, we well may replace up to 11 of those steel truss bridges this year. I should mention also, Mr. Chairman, while we're talking about steel truss bridges, we have about 200 steel truss bridges in Nova Scotia out of the roughly, 3,400 bridges? About 4,000 bridges that we have. These steel truss bridges, the majority of them are 100 years old or older. They are old bridges. They're still safe bridges, they're still good bridges, but they're not built for the traffic conditions that we have on our highways today. And that is the reason why we have a push on to replace those bridges in particular. The bridges were bought back in the around about the turn of the century, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They were bought primarily from a company called American Steel and Bridge. And they used to have salesmen on the road with catalogs, just like Eaton's catalog, and they'd go around and visit municipalities and governments and other businesses that had a requirement for bridges and say, take a look at our catalog, can we sell you a bridge? And it wasn't the Brooklyn Bridge, but that was the principle. And the bridges came in various lengths. You get a bridge 30 feet long, you get a bridge 120 feet long. And then just like a Meccano set, they would, if any of you remember, Meccano used to be, good for you. Okay, they would. Anyway, they would ship that up to the nearest port to the location of the new bridge, and they would unpack it and bolt it together, and there you go. Bob's your uncle. You got yourself a new bridge. Now, Mr. Speaker, we are looking at replacing those steel truss bridges, and we're looking at something along the same lines as trying to get bridges that we can buy to a set design in different lengths and just take them out and have the abutments there and put them on top. Because if we didn't do that, Mr. Chairman, these bridges, to replace some of them, would cost up to $3 million. $3 million. We can replace them with another type of bridge, perfectly adequate, perfectly built bridge that will last for the next 30, 50 years, and we can do it for around about $1 million plus, just over $1 million. So, Mr. Chairman, we are using our good judgment of the engineers that we have to try and accommodate this tremendous problem that we have of replacing 200 bridges in this province. That is besides the other bridges, Mr. Chairman, that we have to replace around the province. Bridges are a big part of our effort around the province, Mr. Chairman. Every year we have to either replace or do extensive repairs and renovations to our bridge infrastructure. We did the Seal Island Bridge. I think everybody remembers just we just finished it last year, actually. $15 million just to refurbish that bridge, not to rebuild it. Beautiful bridge, but a very, very expensive bridge to refurbish. We built a brand new bridge at the Margaree Harbor pardon? And that was another $13 million bridge. Bridges are very expensive, Mr. Chairman, but certainly we're doing our best within the envelope that we have, the cash